It's kind of difficult to do now. Now, he has them under his thumb, and he's telling them, he doesn't come to school but about once every 2 weeks. He comes to school when he wants to come to school. He does what he wants to do, and he takes that, brags when he comes to school about getting his $600 and how every month he goes and buys some type of electronic devices. Things that most people don't have, but boy, he can go and he can get them. And what has happened here is he's had all this kindness but no rules, and they can't tame this wild beast now. As a matter of fact, they tried to clamp down. He turned to them and said, look, I'm the one that's making the money in this household. Imagine that. But that's what happens when we rule over here with this style where it's just all kindness, but there's no rules. And there's a lot of that's going on in our culture today. Well, let's move on to a third kind of person. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because all of us would reject this. All of us. We all know that if you are unkind and unfirm, there's definitely something wrong. I mean, you got both of them wrong, right? You don't have any firmness. You don't have any kindness. And here we have parents that reject their children. There's no rules, but there's also no love. So they just reject their children. Sometimes they abuse their children. They don't praise their children. They control their children. Their children are there to meet their purposes. Kind of like these shepherds here that we were talking about here in Ezekiel 34. You're just here to provide wool for me. You're just here to get that $600 check come in. This is so predominant in our culture today, where parents are using children. As a matter of fact, sometimes this happens in our culture today. People having children just so they can get more money from the government. And it is wrong. It is just wrong. That is not what the Bible teaches us, why the vision that we should have for our children when we bring children into the world. So there's no warmth in their parenting practices, and the family patterns are very chaotic. Now, there are children that come from this. A lot of times are antisocial, criminal behavior as adults, the most deviant and disturbed, Paul Hawke says. In other words, these are our really messed up young people. And you would expect it. When you grow up, you're supposed to be nurtured when you're a tender plant, and you're supposed to be protected from the frost, and you're supposed to be watered, and you're supposed to be fertilized, and you need loose soil. But instead, you grow in hard soil that's not watered, that's not fertilized, that's just left in the hot sun. There's no firmness, there's no kindness. There's none of the things that God requires of parents and homes, the Christian home, that's there. These children grow up really messed up, and they really reject the value system of their parents. So let's get to where we need to be, which you guys know what it is now. Someone who is what? The parents should be firm, and the parents should be kind. This is not the authoritarian style. This is the authoritative style. You're not identified by the authority. You just use the authority as it is needed, when it is needed, to guide, gently guide, and nudge that ship into harbor so it will arrive safely. The authoritative style. Parents offer affection. They offer training. They are respectful of their children's hearts, not to step on those hearts. Their child, on the other hand, is required to be respectful and to be obedient. The child can't just do whatever they want to. They know that there are boundaries there. They allow the children to experience the consequences of their behavior. Do you know that God put us in a world which is a cause-effect world? Sowing and reaping is what the Bible calls it. And we can't get out of that. As long as we're in this world, I don't care how good the government is, we will not get out of a sowing, reaping environment. Somewhere along the way, we will reap what we have sown. And parents are to teach this to our children. I mean, that's why when they're little and they're reaching out for the fire, that we slap the hand. Because we want them to know that there's boundaries. Don't touch that. It's going to hurt you. Because it might not be a big deal for the candle, but later on, when it's the bigger things out there in culture that's going to kill them, then we want them to know the value of the word No. So that when it's said, they recognize that don't go there because I'll get hurt if I go there. So we need the firmness. The children that come from this type of a family and home, which I believe is the Bible-based home. I'll give you some Bible examples here in a minute. These children are the ones who are competent, the most competent, responsible, stable, and well-adjusted adults. And when I think of these particular people in the Bible, of course you could never get a better example than Jesus. Jesus was firm, but Jesus was kind. Do you remember when a man came and knocked at Jesus' door one night and said, "Sir, I know that you're a great teacher, and I know that you come from God, and no man could do these things unless they become from God." Remember, his name was Nicodemus. And do you remember how that Jesus turned to Nicodemus? He could have, if he was like Chuck Depriest a few years ago, he would have turned to Nicodemus and he would have said, "Now wait a minute, here's something wrong with this picture. Nicodemus, you are a ruler of the Jews. And why is it you haven't gotten this right?" But no, Jesus turns to Nicodemus. And he just firmly, yet kindly tells him, "Nicodemus, you must be born again." And he explains some things to him there that were very important. But he was kind yet firm. Remember the man that came to Jesus said, "I want to go to heaven." And Jesus said, "Well, have you kept the commandments?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I've kept all these commandments." And then he goes and he says, "Well, if you will be perfect, go and sell what you have." Because Jesus knew that this man had idols in his heart. And remember, you can have no other gods before the Lord. And this man's idols were the stuff that he had. So that Jesus said to this young man, "Well, if you want to go to heaven, go and sell your stuff." Jesus was being firm, but he was also kind to that young man. He was also kind to him. Remember the woman that was caught in adultery in the very act, and remember those Pharisees that were over there in the authoritarian camp, and they were saying, "Stone her with stones." Well, Jesus was over here in the camp that was both kind and firm. And he writes in the sand, that was kind, and yet it was firm enough that when the Pharisees read it, they walked away. And he looks up at the woman and he says, "Where are those thine accusers?" And she said, "Well, there's not any, Lord." And he says, "Go and sin no more." The woman at the well, he was kind and firm with her. And he was firm when he said, "Yes, you've been married 5 times and now you're with a man that's not even your husband." And yet there was kindness there because there was a bounce in her step when she went back down and she told everybody, "Hey, come see a man who told me everything that I've ever needed to know. Is not this the Messiah? He is the one." She recognized that there was great authority with Jesus, but at the same time there was love that was coming from Jesus in this thing. So guys, I encourage you, as we go back to Ephesians 5, husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. And we said that we want to get our definitions from the Bible. Let's get our definitions from the Word of God, and let's see that the Word of God over and over and over shows people who are both loving and who are kind. Pastor Noyes read this morning about Abraham. Abraham was a very firm man. Believe me, he was firm. But he was also very kind in what he did. I don't read about Abraham being ornery and mean-spirited. He was a kind man, yet firm in what he did. We need to be firm and yet kind in our dealings with others. We're going to have the love of Jesus Christ inside of us, and we're going to love everybody. As a Christian, God calls us to love everybody that comes along. But at the same time, don't give up standards. You have standards. You've got boundaries. You've got to hold to those boundaries, and you've got to hold to them firmly. And you know what? I know you guys here at this church, and know your pastor, this is what you guys are doing. Let's be sure where it really counts that we're doing that, and that's at home.